Hello, everyone. My name is Flora DeReuter. I'm excited to be joining you today. I'm also joined by my colleague, Meg Gibbon. I am the Monitoring and Evaluation Program Officer for Switchboard, and Meg is the Learning and Knowledge Management Program Officer. If you're not familiar with Switchboard, it's a one-stop resource hub for refugee service providers in the U.S. And with the support of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, we offer tools, materials, different learning opportunities, and technical assistance on resettlement-related topics. I did want to just let everyone know today that this webinar will be recorded, and the recording will eventually be on our Switchboard website. So I'm going to hand it over to Meg now, just to walk you through some of the WebEx logistics.
Great, thank you, Flora. So everyone is currently on mute at the moment. It looks like we're going to be joined by a fairly large group today. Those using the phone audio can find the dial-in number and code at any time via the info icon in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. I mentioned this over chat, but if you are signed in using just one computer, but you're participating with one of your colleagues in the room with you, please add both of your names and your organization into the chat so we're aware of who's joining us today. So if you have a question at any time, you'll find a hand icon, quite a small icon in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Feel free to raise your hand, and we'd be more than happy to unmute your line for you to ask a question during our Q&A. You can also type questions in the chat box throughout. So you'll find that chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. If it's not there, you can open it by clicking the chat bubble icon, which is in that icon tray in the middle center there, as you see on the screen. Once you open up that chat window, you can go ahead and type your message. Do be sure to send your message to all participants so that we can all see your comments or questions.
Great, thanks, Meg. So I'd like to start by laying out some key learning objectives for today's webinar. So we hope that by the end of today's webinar, you will be able to define data analysis in the context of the data-driven program cycle, describe necessary steps to prepare for data analysis, and finally begin analyzing data for learning and program improvement. And we'll have some time for questions throughout the presentation, and we'll conclude with a feedback survey. So let's start by defining some key phrases and terms, and then discuss the purpose of data analysis. To start, you may have heard the phrase data-driven programs. So I'd like to talk about some elements of what constitutes data-driven programs. First, they're programs where data shapes program design and informs decision-making during the life of the program. It also is important that data be good quality, purposeful, and timely. And we'll talk through this a little later about what we mean by quality data. And finally, processes must be in place to analyze, reflect, and act on data. So if these processes aren't in place, it's going to be difficult for your program really to be data-driven. So we'll be talking about some of the steps necessary to plan for data analysis. So I'd like to define some key terms before we get started. So data collection is the systematic gathering of data necessary for designing, implementing, and monitoring projects. Next, we have data management, which refers to the process of compiling, storing, and protecting data. And then finally, data analysis. So this is the process of interpreting and transforming raw data into information that's usable and or that advances knowledge or understanding. So this diagram summarizes the steps that can be taken throughout the program cycle to ensure that programs are both data-driven and evidence-based. And I should note that this can vary a bit depending on the program, but these are some typical steps. So as I mentioned before, data-driven programs are those where data shapes program design and informs decision-making during the life of the program. And when we talk about evidence-based programs, it's those where existing evidence has been used to inform the theory of change and implementation. So you can see that throughout this diagram, it includes steps to prepare for data analysis, and those steps might include data collection, data management, as well as data management itself, and then how you can use the results of your data analysis. And this all fits into the larger data-driven evidence-based program cycle. So you'll see in this yellow color the design phase. That's where you might use data to inform your program model for planning purposes. Then we have the startup phase in kind of light red. So you may be developing data collection and management tools at this stage and training staff on how to use these. Then during implementation, you're using data analysis to inform your programming along the way. And then the end of the program cycle, which you'll see in that kind of purple-violet color, you'll use the results of your data analysis for reporting purposes, as well as capturing findings and lessons learned. And then those findings can also feed into any new programs you're designing, which is really why you can think of it as a cycle. So now we have a discussion question, which Meg will talk you through.
So as Fleur begins to jump into some of these concepts, we really wanted to hear first from you. I know there are so many challenges in our daily work related to data analysis. So in the chat, what do you think is the biggest data analysis challenge that you face in your work? Great. Starting to see some come through here. I know there are many, so I'm sure people are thinking through this question. Colby shared that data collection is a challenge and data integrity is a challenge, definitely. Nabil shared not having enough data to do data analysis. I think this is a really important one and one that Fleur is going to get into in a lot more detail because it's sometimes a question not only of having enough data, but having the right data, right? The data that we actually need, and not spending time on data we don't need. Kevin shared knowing what to collect and how to actually use that data in analysis. Sure, that aligns with what Nabil mentioned. I really like Heather's comment. We know that we do good work, but how to make that apparent in a data-driven format. I think this gets to a great question about what data we can use to communicate to others about our program. How can we share what we may know, and intuitively know, or anecdotally know about our program by gathering data and making that available. I'm seeing some challenges related to data management as well. So data management, as Fleur mentioned, that process of managing the data and maintaining its quality once it is collected, for instance, in a database, spreadsheet, and so on. Certainly can be a challenge depending on the system that you're using. It looks like many of the challenges are related to data collection, not knowing what data to collect, as well as knowing what to do with the data once you have it. So I think those are really important steps to talk about. And then one last one I'll mention, it looks like a few folks mentioned this. Allison mentioned this, as well as I think I saw one or two other comments around capacity, not having the capacity to do the both quantitative and qualitative data analysis. Yeah, this is a great point. When we talk about capacity, we can talk about human capacity, so staff time, as well as financial capacity, both knowledge, training, and so on. So really a lot of types of capacity that are relevant for data analysis and the steps to prepare for it that are not always there. And so I'm happy to say that the approach that Fleur will be describing throughout today's training is a approach that takes a first step of starting where you are, starting anywhere, taking off a small chunk, not working beyond capacity or beyond means to really begin where the capacity is and take a first early step towards becoming more data-driven in a program. These are all great responses. Thank you so much for sharing all of these into the chat. I think we'll go ahead and move on.
Great. So thanks so much for sharing those challenges. Just wanted to touch on the purpose of data analysis. So you're likely all aware of the importance of data analysis for reporting, which we do for our donors, and compliance. And of course, that's an important component of program quality. But I did want to just mention just as important is using data analysis as a tool for learning about your program and how you can take what you've learned to make improvements. So by doing this, you're able to shed light on a specific question or a set of questions you'd like to focus on. And also, these two purposes are not mutually exclusive. For example, by learning more deeply about your program, this might also help you as you're preparing your reports for your donor. So now I'd like to hand it over to Meg again for some polling we'd like to do.
All right, thanks, Flora. So I just went ahead and opened a poll. And the question on this poll is, can you think of a time when you did use program data to inform changes in the program? So we talked about some challenges a moment ago. What about in terms of successes? Was there a time when you used your program data to inform a change, a specific change? I'll just keep this open for maybe 15 seconds. And I want to mention it's okay to say no on a question like this. That's sort of what this training is aiming to be here for. So if the answer is no, don't hesitate to share that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. I do see a few answers still coming in. Great. So thank you so much for participating in that. I will share the results with you momentarily as the poll closes and people finalize their responses. I can share that of so far the 34 participants who filled out the poll, it looks like 30 said yes, that you can think of a time you used your program data to inform a change, and 4 said no, that you cannot think of a time when you made a change in the program. I'll go ahead and share these poll results with you now. And for those of you who said that you did use your program data to inform a change, tell us in the chat what specific changes or change did you make based on the data that you had. I think some great examples I can share from my own experience are, for example, using assessment scores from a job readiness class to alter the design of the job readiness curriculum and then of the assessment itself, because we found that clients were exceeding the assessment's expectations. We found the assessment was too easy, and so we could go back and revise the curriculum, revise the assessment to capture knowledge in a more appropriate way. And we used the assessment scores where a lot of people were scoring very highly to inform that change in the implementation. That's just one example from my end, but I'll take a look now in the chat to hear what changes you all made. I know 30 of you said you made a change, so I won't expect 30 replies in the chat, but I would love to hear from a few of you. Some great responses coming in now. So Bushra mentioned that in their program, they improved health programming using responses and feedback from evaluations given to clients after a health orientation. Yeah, this is a similar response to the one that I had provided. So using an evaluation and in particular a client feedback evaluation to inform changes in the program design is definitely a data-driven step to take. A great example from Kevin as well, we used wage data for female clients in gender programs to make sure we were addressing gender equity in programming. I really love this example. This gets to a use of program data, so output or outcome data to make a data-driven change more than data collected as a special project outside of what you're already collecting, right? I think sometimes to become data-driven, it can be intimidating to say, oh, we have to collect more data that we're then going to use to make program decisions. In this case, I think it's a great example of collecting data, wage data that was likely already part of the program outputs or program outcomes, and then analyzing that, using that to inform the program. Or correct me if I'm wrong about that, Kevin. A lot of great responses. I would really encourage you to read through the responses being shared in the chat. Why don't I share just one or two more? Data taken from a gender analysis that was used to improve programming and create a new job readiness program for female Afghan clients. That example was from Jonathan. I think that's a great example as well, and actually going in a bit of a different direction than the one I just mentioned. This shows the potential for a dedicated data collection project to go ahead and expand a program or create a new program. Certainly not something that we would always have resources for, the ability to do, both undertaking a project like that as well as starting up a brand new program. But where that opportunity is there, that's fantastic. And then maybe I'll read this final example here from Allison. We discovered gaps in our data collection about tuberculosis and changed our processes to educate providers about data collection and reporting. And so I think I wanted to flag this one because this gets into a use of data to become stronger in monitoring and evaluation. So this is something that we see a lot, where not only does the data itself inform changes in the program design, rather than, say, informing a change in how providers are doing healthcare, this data also informed a change in the program monitoring and evaluation training or your processes and things like that, because without having those M&E background or M&E processes built into the program, it can then be challenging to know what data you have, be confident that it is reliable, and then go forward to actually deliver the service. So I think that's a really good example of how data can be used in multiple ways. Yeah, some similar examples about improving the data collection process itself. Absolutely, right? The data you have will lead you to improve your M&E processes, absolutely. All right, I see several great examples in here. I would definitely encourage everyone to check them out, see if there are ideas that will be relevant to your own work. For the moment, why don't we go ahead and move on? So we're going to transition now here into steps needed to prepare for data analysis. So Flora alluded to some of these earlier when she was defining key terms. And we want to make sure that we emphasize this, because jumping right ahead and talking about how to do data analysis actually isn't always useful if the proper steps haven't been taken in advance to make sure the data that we have to analyze is the data that we need. And so in the interest of answering another poll, I'm going to just go ahead and pose this question to you. Give me just a moment to open that up. Okay, so another poll should have just popped up for you. I'm wondering, have you had the experience of putting time and effort into collecting program data, then realizing after the fact that it was not the data you actually needed? And again, there's not a right or wrong answer to this question. So I'll give it about 30 seconds for those responses to come in. Great, thanks everyone who's participated so far in this poll. I'll go ahead and close that up now. So I'll share again the results with you in just a moment, like I did last time. But of the 33 respondents who had provided an answer, looks like 28 said that yes, they have had this experience, and 4 said you have not. And so I would welcome you to describe this experience if you'd like in the chat. But in this case, I just wanted to touch on this briefly rather than dig into it too deeply, just because I think this is so common. I'll go ahead and share these results with you. Speaking for myself, this is an experience I've had many times, and one that I think almost every person that I've worked with has also shared. And I think those of you who said you haven't had this challenge, it's really a great thing that hasn't been the case, because it speaks to a really strong planning process in the design of your monitoring and evaluation system. So that design phase and M&E planning phase where you're laying out what data you need to collect and why, then specifically how you'll collect it and to what quality standards, because if that data that you are collecting and really investing a lot of staff time, in many cases into collecting doesn't turn out to be the data you need or presented in the right way or to the right level of quality that you need, of course, then you're left in the lurch sort of later on in the program. So I can share an experience where this happened on a program that I was working on. And what we had to do was when we were really quite late, almost at the mid-year report, that we realized that the format of the data we were gathering wasn't the format that we needed. We had to engage in a conversation with the donor that was fairly uncomfortable and said, we had to own up to this mistake and had said, we need to take a pause on this indicator and really revisit it from a different angle than we originally proposed. And that's not something that happens every time, but you never want to be put in a position to have to, looking back, explain or revise indicators or revise data collection plans when the effort is put in up front. And so Fleur is going to make a case in just a moment for investing a little bit of time into the M&E planning process in order to prepare for strong data analysis. And I just wanted to share this poll and sort of my experience in this, because I do think that investing that amount of time up front, even though it is, a bit of a time investment in the beginning, can actually be a big time saver down the line, preventing issues or errors or confusion that takes longer to resolve than had we done effective planning from the beginning.
Great, thanks, Meg. So in order to avoid the situation of putting time and effort into data collection and, and realizing after the fact that it was not the data you needed, I think it's really important to prepare for data collection by defining those key questions first and then collecting the data to answer those questions. So I'll just walk through a few notes on that. So clearly define the questions you want to answer. And at this point, you should ask, what is it I want to learn? And get as specific and clear as possible at that stage. And you want to make sure that everyone involved in data collection and analysis is on the same page. And it's helpful to ask not only what we want to learn, but why we want to learn it. So what will we actually do once we know the answers to these questions? And then in defining these questions, be realistic about what questions you can answer using your data and given your capacity, whether that's resources, time, staff capacity. So for instance, you might want to know the answer to a question like, how quickly are our clients becoming self-sufficient? When really we're only able to answer a question like, what is the average hourly wage of our employed clients at 180 days? So it's critical to get clear from the start about what we can realistically learn and then build data collection processes from there. And we'll look at this in some more detail using some sample data. And then ideally, only once your key questions have been defined should you decide what data to collect. But we are sometimes in a position where donors specify the data needed to collect and report on, and without outlining what we can learn from it. And then in cases like this, it's still possible and still useful to map out the data we are required to collect and to see what we can realistically learn from that data and what we have on hand. Okay, so next I want to talk a little bit about strong data collection. So one component of that is aligning data collection tools to the questions you want to answer and the data needed to answer those questions. So this means ensuring your client intake forms, surveys, assessments, etc., are collecting the right data based on what you want to learn. And this can help prevent the situation that we saw in the poll, collecting data that wasn't what we ultimately needed. And second, investing in training staff on using tools consistently. So this is really an upfront investment. It requires time, energy, but I think that time and energy spent training will pay off in higher quality data. And this helps ensure source data is consistent going into your data management system. So some tips for strong data management. A well-structured data management system, whether that's a database or spreadsheet, is critical. You want to include individual as well as case data, and you want to be able to disaggregate data by gender. And so we don't always have control over our data management system's design, but we can ensure we're using the system we do have, both correctly and consistently. And when data is exported from a database, for example, if any further manipulation is happening in a system, for example, for Excel, we can also work with you on structuring those spreadsheets effectively, and that's something that Switchboard can help with if you're interested. And next, data quality assurance. So it's important to follow standard operating procedures. And this will vary to meet your organization or your program's needs, but I would say at a minimum, it should include processes for checking individual data quality, discussing data quality with peer staff, data quality audits by supervisors, and then following up on any issues that might have arisen in a timely manner. And finally, pay attention to staff buy-in. So if staff aren't on board with the importance of quality data, and if they really see it only as a burden, we're not likely to get much out of the process. And I think it's important that staff will need to see data analysis as a useful resource for answering questions and testing their ideas about the program. So I mentioned the elements of quality data. So I'd like to kind of walk through one way to kind of look at these elements. So first, is it complete? Meaning there's no missing data, dashes, or letters where there should be numbers. Next, is it correct? So does the data accurately reflect the reality of the project or program? Next, consistent. Is the data free from, kind of any deliberate bias or manipulation, so we don't see the same numbers appear over and over again, or, preferential end digits, for example, ending in 0 or 5. And finally, timely. So the data is collected and reported without delays and within a time frame that allows for it to influence decision making. So now let's walk through a simple example to illustrate the importance of high quality data. So you see here a sample spreadsheet, and let's say we're interested in the following question. How many female Iraqi clients age 30 and above are currently enrolled in our program? So I'll just repeat the question we're interested in. How many female Iraqi clients age 30 and above are currently enrolled in our program? So just note that this is a simplified version of the spreadsheet for the purposes of this training. But going back to our key questions, what is it I want to learn? What data do I need to answer it? In the chat, I'd like to get your responses on this. So does this spreadsheet, as it is now, provide all of the data we need to answer the question? And if not, what additional data do we need? And are there any data quality issues that need to be addressed as well? So I'll just give you a minute to look at the sample spreadsheet and identify anything that you think might be an issue. Okay, so I'm seeing some responses come in. Hold on one second. Yep, so from Keith, consistent formatting and date of birth input is an issue. And actually, I see many of you identified that. Someone identified nationality, right? There's something missing there. Stephanie identified there's missing gender info and nationality. Many of you mentioned gender. There's incomplete cells and different date conventions. So I think you have correctly identified many issues with this sample spreadsheet. So we'll just look. Highlighted here, you can see, as you identified, the birth dates are basically inconsistent. You see one of them uses an apostrophe, one of them is, uses May 8th written out, one of them seems to only have the month and year. So this is obviously all a problem, down the line in terms of data quality. We also see that the nationality is missing for client ID 3. And as many of you mentioned, we also are missing a key variable of gender because the question was how many female Iraqi clients age 30 and above are currently enrolled. That's absolutely critical that we also need to know that variable. So here you see, the date of birth should now be consistent. We have a column for gender. We have the nationality all filled in. So this data looks much better in terms of the components we talked about for data quality. And we can now identify that client who is an Iraqi female client, age 30 and above. So just want to pause for a moment. If there's questions, you can raise your hand or type in the chat. And please send your message to all participants so we can see it. So just pause for a minute here. Okay, I don't see anything yet, but please if you do have questions, we also will pause at the end to answer anything. Okay, so now I'll hand it to Meg for another discussion question.
Great, thank you, Flor. So Flor just showed an example of one specific question for that fictional spreadsheet of information that we might want to learn. This question around female Iraqi clients age 30 and older, and we can imagine that in that case, that program staff or that program wanted to do something with that information and wanted to know that for a certain reason. And so I wanted to hear from everyone on the call today. What's one thing that you would like to learn about your clients through your data? I know there's often many things we want to learn, but maybe just name one thing in the chat that, and from the form of a question that you wish that you could answer using your data. All right, great. I'm seeing a few responses come in. So Nabil mentioned that one thing he wants to know from his data is our impact and if we really helped our clients. And then Colby mentioned something similar, whether our services are having an impact. And I think that's a really good question because a lot of the time this is the type of thing we want to be able to answer. But really it's often too broad of a question to write, sort of a data analysis plan for, or really to map out using individual data points. So Flor will show an example shortly in getting more specific on a question like that. I like that Colby gave an example, around whether our services are having an impact and said, for example, does the English class we provide lead to improved English outcomes? So yeah, that's the type of question is a little bit easier to answer with data and can be actually made potentially even more specific as well. So Kevin mentioned that one thing he'd like to learn is more complete family demographic data. And so that kind of gets to a question of, who are we serving, right? Who is our population? Who's coming to our door? Which can be used in a lot of meaningful ways, like informing program outreach or thinking about, are there populations that we're missing and that we do want to try to reach with our services? Or are there populations we're reaching really successfully that we can, potentially shift our strategy for enrollment, things like that. Halima mentioned that she's looking to identify the attitudinal shift of clients before and after potentially a certain service. I think that's also a really useful one. You see a pre and post assessment used to answer a question like, did our clients' knowledge, satisfaction, skills, abilities change prior to and then following an intervention? I'm seeing a lot of great questions come in. I love the question here that Jesse shared. Why are clients leaving English classes? Is it transportation, childcare, work schedule, etc.? What I like about this question is that it's really specific. It's something that has potentially a certain number of answers that could be discoverable through data collection and analysis. So I think that's a great question to start with when defining, your data analysis and data collection plans. These are all really great questions. I may move on from here to allow some, make sure we have enough time for the remaining content, but I will return to some of these towards the end because I think they'd be good questions to discuss with Flor.
Great, so let's move to some examples of data analysis in practice and really kind of refining, the question and breaking it down. So here we have the question here, are there differences in job placement rates between men and women? We might be interested in this question for our program. So as I mentioned before, we highly encourage you to map out your key questions like this, and I think it'll give you a realistic picture of the data you need to answer your question. So first we have question, indicator, and then data needed. So the indicator refers to a variable that represents a valid measure of change. And then we'll also break it down into, okay, if we have this specific indicator, what data do we need to actually answer the question? So you'll see here, we have an example of an indicator. So in order to get at this question, are there differences in job placement rates between men and women, we could look at the indicator percent of clients placed in jobs within a given time frame. So, quarter or fiscal year, and then disaggregated by gender. And then we could break that down and say, okay, in order to measure that indicator, what data do we specifically need? So we need the number of male and number of female clients enrolled in job placement services. And we also then need the number of male and number of female clients actually placed in jobs. So here we see a graph of the percentage of clients who obtained employment in fiscal year 18. And so you see at the bottom site A, 62% of clients obtained employment. And then you see site B, 72% of clients who obtained employment. So if you have this data alone, you might notice that site B has higher job placement rates at 72% than site A. But you might also be missing some key information. So we'll look at this next graph. The percentage of clients who obtained employment in fiscal year 18 by gender. So now we see kind of a more, I guess, complex picture of our program in a way. So site A, we see that actually, even though the job placement rates were lower than site B, if we look at males and females, it's pretty equal. Whereas for site B, we see, the female, the percentage who obtained employment is 52%, and male is 92%. So we see this kind of a big gap here for site B. So that all, looking at your data in this different way, it also might influence how you think about your program and what action you might take. So, for example, for this, Site A, knowing this information, could focus on increasing their overall job placement rate. And maybe Site B wants to examine what could be some of the reasons for the discrepancy between male and female job placement rates, and how can the program be improved to address potential barriers faced by women. So next we'll look at another example. Here we have the question, are we reaching annual targets for vocational training programs? So what data do I need to answer my question? So in terms of the indicator, we'll need to know the number of clients who enroll in vocational training, who receive it, and who complete it, because since those are our three kind of targets that we've set out in advance. And then for the data needed, we'll need the fiscal year targets for clients who enroll in, receive, and complete vocational training, respectively. And those should have been set, at the start of the program. The number of clients who enroll in vocational training per fiscal year, and the number of clients who receive vocational training, and then finally the number of clients who complete vocational training. So once we've done our analysis, we'll see fiscal year 18 vocational training program year-end targets compared to actuals. And you see this overlapping bar chart or thermometer chart, as it also can be called. The formatting allows us to imagine that the actual bar in gray is filling up the target box. And so the actual figures, as I mentioned, are in gray, and the target is in that purple color. So we can see that the program exceeded the target for number enrolled in vocational training and also exceeded the target slightly for clients receiving vocational training. However, the program did not meet their target for clients completing vocational training. So you see our target was 60, and we only 50 clients completed this training. So by analyzing the different targets, program staff now may have a clearer understanding of what targets are not being met, and they could look into any common reasons why some clients aren't completing vocational training. Next, we have a third question, do clients end up leaving certain employers quickly? So in terms of data needed to answer this question, we might want to look at the percentage of clients who exit employment before 90 days and then disaggregated by employer. Once again, we want to get really specific about what data we need to answer this. So we have here the number of clients who have been employed by each employer, as well as the number of clients who exit employment before 90 days for each employer. And then when we do the analysis, here we have the percent of clients who reached the 90-day retention mark per employer. So we see we have employer A, B, C, and D on the x-axis, and the different percentages. So we see that employers A, C, and D have relatively high retention percentages. But from our analysis, we see that employer B actually only has 30% retention for clients after 90 days. So this is really useful information because we can kind of hone in on, okay, what's happening with employer B. It's also important to note that this does not give us, the kind of the final answer. We still don't really know why, right? So what is the issue? And that's something that, if we had this data, we could then discuss with our team, maybe to gather some more information about what's happening and how we can best address this. So next, I want to talk a little bit about how do you incorporate regular data analysis into your work, and how do you involve others? So I'd like to talk about action planning, which is regular meetings that should be held throughout the project cycle to review monitoring data, assess project progress and implementation processes, identify trends, and determine the implications of findings, and then develop action plans to respond or shift course as needed. So you really want to focus on collaborative data interpretation. And the idea is to shift the focus from just reporting and compliance to a conversation about learning. So how do you interpret the information? What do you think we should consider doing? And then standardize action plans as much as possible. And finally, build action planning into regular meetings. So I think the point is that data analysis and action planning might be intimidating, but it can be manageable if you, for example, just tackle one question per meeting or look at data, for just one specific program. And that, I think, helps minimize the intimidation of a mountain of data. You can start small, and it'll still be really meaningful. And we talked about data quality assurance earlier, and this can be done as part of these routine processes. So, regularly checking data quality with your team can catch problems early on. So now I'd like to introduce the idea of the team-based inquiry approach to help you focus on which questions you might want to prioritize. And so this approach involves an ongoing cycle of inquiry. So you question, investigate, reflect, and try to improve your program. And it helps teams prioritize questions based on how useful, actionable, and feasible each question is. So here I want to show you an approach to walking through a joint exercise with a team. So your inquiry question might be, do clients end up leaving certain employers quickly? And you want to maybe see, how high of a priority is this for our team? So you could look at, why is this question important to your team? Then you could look at, what types of information would you need to answer this question? What resources would you need to answer this question? What changes might you be able to make if you answered the question? And then you can collaboratively decide on how high of a priority is this question. So, for this question, we might find this an important question because, we're concerned about job retention. Obviously, it's important for clients to have steady income, and they don't want to work in a negative environment. In terms of the types of information you'll need data on job placements for all clients by employer. You'll need the number of clients who exit employment before 90 days for each employer. And the resources, depending on how you're tracking data, you might, you need some kind of database or tracker and staff time to collect data points if you're not collecting all that information already. In terms of the changes you might be able to make, you maybe could change your approach to partnerships with specific employers. And then from there, after you've done kind of this team-based exercise, you might be able to discuss how high of a priority is this question. If you have several questions you're interested in, you could kind of see, okay, which one is high, medium, or low. And so I'll show an example on the next page. Here we have that same question: do clients end up leaving certain employers quickly? We also have three additional questions that the team might be interested in. So in addition to that first question, the team might be interested in, are there differences in job placement rates between men and women? Are we reaching targets for vocational training programs? And then finally, what are clients' average wages after 5 years of arrival? So in this case, the team has decided they want to focus on the first three questions since they discussed the last question about long-term outcomes, which is very important. But after discussing it, the team realized they don't currently have the resources to answer this question. So that's why, they went through this process of seeing what was a priority. And so just to go through some steps for the actual action planning meetings, first you want to make sure the right staff is included in the conversation. You also want to remind everyone of the learning priorities, and you want to review the status of past action steps. You want to walk through questions while looking at the data and identifying any issues and actions needed. And then finally, you want to review the necessary next steps and the plan for follow-up. So to keep the focus on action, it can be helpful to focus on the following 3 questions. First, what steps do the data suggest we take? For instance, this could be gathering more information, sharing analysis with others in the organization or with a donor, or it could even mean changing course in program implementation. Next, which steps are the highest priority? And finally, who will be responsible for these steps? So assigning a specific person or maybe multiple staff members to implement these steps, depending on what next steps you're going to take. So here is an example of an action planning template that you could use. And I should note this is also, we have an example of this also on the Switchboard site. So if you want to access that, you definitely can, and hopefully it'll be useful for you in your own meetings. So here you'll just see, the brief description of the issues identified during your meeting. Then you can list the concrete action needed to address the issue. You'll be able to note down who is the person responsible for taking any action and set some deadlines for starting action and then for completing it. And then you can have, a status column at the end. Is this started, in progress, or complete? So this is all about kind of making it a little bit more systematic and building it into meetings that you have regularly. So in terms of some additional resources, I mentioned the data analysis and action planning meeting template. There's also a data analysis e-learning module that you might be interested in, which dives a little bit deeper into data analysis. And finally, if you require additional technical assistance, we're always happy to see if we can help. You can just go to our website and or email us, and we can see how can we assist you with your specific issue. So just to recap what we went over today, we hope that you'll now be able to define data analysis in the context of the data-driven program cycle, describe those necessary steps to prepare for data analysis, and finally, through the examples we went through, begin analyzing data for learning and program improvements. So we have a few minutes left, and I think I just want to turn now to any questions you have about anything that was mentioned in today's presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Flor. I did see a few questions come in over the course of your presentation. What other questions does everyone have? Please go ahead and put them into the chat as well. So the ones that I've seen so far, when you showed a spreadsheet earlier, that sample spreadsheet, just a question around client privacy. Someone mentioned, would we have to get explicit permission from each individual to put them into a spreadsheet like that one? And then would we actually have to get IRB approval for something like that?
Yeah, so for the example I showed, this was meant to be in a lot of databases, you can export that data directly into Excel. And so you want to make sure that you're following, your program's protocols. You wouldn't be, for instance, emailing the spreadsheet back and forth. You want to keep it very safe and secure. In terms of IRB approval, I think that is really meant for research that will be published. So the idea with this kind of internal data analysis is more really about keeping it within your team. So it's not necessarily that you're going to, go and publish this research. It's more for internal use. Great.
And then a question that sort of responded to some of the challenges that were raised earlier on during the activities. Do you have suggestions for improving the objectivity of the data we're collecting when a lot of the data is self-reported by clients?
I think that's a really important question and something that I think there's still an ongoing discussion on, with people who do data collection, because you're right, it's, especially sometimes if you're trying to get at feelings and things, it depends. Like sometimes satisfaction, for example, can be, it's really important to know whether or not a client was satisfied. In other instances, how you write the question, I think it's hard for me to say kind of a broad strokes, but I would love to, if you have a survey you're working on, I would love, to collaborate. If you want to, shoot us an email, we can look at, what language you might be able to change or adapt. So.
Yeah, I certainly agree with Flora on that one too, that question wording can have a big impact on the responses received, so that's a big one, as well as whether the data collection tool is sort of enumerated by someone in your office or by an interpreter versus self-administered, depending on the type of data you're collecting. That's an interesting question to think through as well. Something like a satisfaction survey where the client is just maybe on an iPad in a waiting room, you may get more reliable results than if you have the caseworker who the question is about asking the question directly to that person, just to give an example. I'm reading through now to see what other questions you all asked. Please continue to type them in. So a question on quantitative versus qualitative data analysis. So when we are, if I'm understanding the question correctly here, when we're reporting data to donors, typically it's quantitative data that we are reporting, as in the examples that you showed today. For what can you say about qualitative data analysis and the value of that?
Sure, thanks for that question. So I think that qualitative analysis can be really useful in kind of when we don't know why, what we found out through our quantitative analysis is happening. For example, if we look at, males and females and job placement rates, the quantitative analysis could indicate, okay, there's a discrepancy between men and women, but it doesn't necessarily tell us why that's happening. So, things like focus groups, interviews, to really dig into, talking to clients, talking to staff. I think that kind of qualitative information can be really valuable, especially when coupled with the quantitative analysis you've already done.
And one thing I can add too, I think sometimes qualitative and quantitative data can overlap quite a bit. So if you ask clients, how many, for satisfaction comments and things like that, sometimes it's hard to analyze without quantifying that data first. So something quantifiable would be like number of clients who said X, or, included this in their response, something like that. Then you have a quantifiable number that you can analyze as well. Something that's a really interesting conversation, coding and analyzing qualitative data for sure. I see a nice comment here from Sarah. I wish we could do a whole separate webinar on doing satisfaction surveys with pre-literate or illiterate clients. I think that's a great comment. Stay tuned for our listserv because we do have more monitoring and evaluation webinars coming up, and client satisfaction is a topic that we are very interested in for FY19 because I know there's a lot of attention on this currently. I think we have reached the end of our webinar, and so I can just mention a few final comments. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and of course to you, Flor, for facilitating today. I hope this was a valuable discussion. Once you close this webinar, you will be brought to our satisfaction survey. Speaking of satisfaction, we would love for you to please fill that out to help us improve our future trainings. As Flor mentioned, please stay connected with us. Visit our website, and you can submit a TA request with specific data analysis challenges if you think our input could be helpful. We would love to work with you on designing tools, analyzing data, and so on. So don't hesitate to do that, and we'll explore whether it's possible. And then go ahead and reach out to us over email if you would like, and you can check us out on Twitter as well at Switchboard TA. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. For any colleagues of yours who missed today's webinar, you can let them know that the recording will be available on our website within the next day or two. Thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.